When you were going to school, do you feel that young students were encouraged to write, or were encouraged to, be creative, or do you feel that that just wasn't part of the curriculum or part of people's way of thinking?
No, definitely not part of the curriculum. We were just, especially when I was in the science and math areas, I don't think I was confined or expected to just excel or in that realm.
I think Singapore is very compartmentalized, right? If you're in a science, nobody expects you to do anything relating even vaguely to the arts or something.
Yeah.
And do you think that's changed? Do you think that's, as Singapore has become a bit more cosmopolitan? Or?
I think there are certain schools where students get the opportunity to try different areas and stretch out a bit more. But I think it's not true in general. I think for very specific schools where they have the resources, I suppose. They definitely didn't have programs like the Creative Arts program at NUS at the time.
We have the movie coming up.
Gone Case.
Or the meeting.
The movie.
Why not?
Maybe.
No, I mean you've been quite involved in the graphic, visual, to some degree the film scene. So in a sense, it's kind of a natural transition. Gone Case, I think, did quite well in terms of the transition. Are there plans? I'm assuming there are already plans.
No. Okay.
Some sort of
They have done
film.
before, right? A film, short story versions of the stories.
No.
I'm surprised.
Okay. Maybe a bit more of my background. So after I came back, I wrote the beating. It got commendation, and I was satisfied for that writing for a while. I went to NYU to do a 6-week program in filmmaking, where you actually had to cut the film and splice it together. I like these days where you edit everything digitally. I came back and worked for a video production firm for a while. I did the web thing, which I thought would bring together my interest in computers and writing and media. Then after that, I joined MediaWorks, the former SPH company. Yes, that wasn't, I would say, a great experience, especially after Lee Kuan Yew said that Singapore can't have two stations. So
it was just after they split, or when they come together again.
It was after they split. I think it was only about 6-7 months.
Okay.
And then the big guy said this can't go on.
You can't have competition.
Yeah, and of course, in a monopoly like the media is, when something a competitor comes along, it's tremendously disruptive. And they should just let it run its course and find some stability instead of just killing it. So the mood at MediaWorks, I think there were a lot of pissed people, especially a lot of technicians who had left MediaCore to join MediaWorks. At the time, I was supposed to have written some stuff for MediaWorks as well, scripts and so on, but ironically, I didn't. But after I left MediaWorks, I did write a bit for Channel I and all that. But I found that a bit of a struggle, because here the budgets are so compromised. You're asked to cut so much, and the writer is really treated, at the bottom layer. You're really the person probably most ignored, or in order to get the stuff done, often
So creative.
creatively you're just not regarded.
You don't get the respect.
Yeah, so I'm not too crazy about pushing or getting a film version of either Gone Case or The Beating. If the right person approaches it with a, I guess, right amount of sincerity and all. I understand there'll be compromises, of course. Maybe I would be willing to let go forward. But
Someone who's independent, maybe.
Yeah.
From this system.
yeah, but I'm not going to push for it or ask for it. And I did some directing as well. I don't think I'm the person to do it as well, because it's such a managerial thing, which I also find very confounding. You need a certain type to direct as well.
So curiously, I want to know which TV programs were you involved in?
Okay, there was something called Live on channel, was it I or TV Works at the time?
Live?
Yeah, it was also just a bunch of Singaporean focused stories. So I did a script for those. It was also quite a learning experience for me because I was still a novice in that regard. And the first adaptation was okay, but the second one wasn't very well done. I thought the director had taken a lot of shortcuts and really mutilated the script. So, and then of course Channel I died, and that was the end of that. Also wrote an episode of Acha, this series about interracial marriage.
Yes.
Which also wasn't a very good experience in terms of payment. It didn't make sense to spend so much time on it, and in the end, so much of it being cut and compromised.
What kind of stuff get cut?
Okay, too many actors, too many sets, and all.
Okay.
So
It's not censorship issues.
It's not
more
censorship.
practical issues.
yeah, and it's extremely practical to the point of being ludicrous. It's really okay. Let's get a product out. Mediocre, it's fine. We get paid. That's fine. There's no push, I think, to excel. I think that's my big rant against MediaCorp all this year. There's no reason to excel when you're in this kind of, when there's no real competitor. You just try on doing the same thing every year.
Have you ever encountered censorship issues of any sort?
I'm gonna ask.
Okay, I'm with the Film Society, and then we've often encountered censorship issues with our films now. But for writing, I think we focus more on that. Not that much here.
Can you mention your relationship with the Film Society?
Well, I'm very interested in film. So I was vice chairman for a while for the Film Society, which is actually run by Kenneth Tan, who is COO of Chief Operating Officer of the MDA, the Media Development Authority here. So because I've been busy here and I stepped down, so I'm just a committee member currently. I programmed an animation festival the past few years, and there have been frequent run-ins with the censors. And of course, a lot of things you throw your hands at, but often censorship here, I guess, is you submit something as a black box and you get back a rating and you don't know why or how it came about. And it's been a frustrating experience often for the Film Society.
What do you mean? They don't give you comments on why certain books or films are rejected?
They used to not to, but they do give more comments now.
Right.
And I think they don't outright ban, but they say, okay, this has to be removed. And
For what reasons?
for recently we had a Greek film that I think there are suggestions of incest.
Right.
So that
But there's already an RA rating, right? I mean, if
it can't.
it's still not good enough.
Still not good enough, and it's an award-winning film, and stuff like that. But frequently that's the case, and I think also certain films tread on religious and social issues, and they're very careful about that in particular. A bit too careful to write, especially these days when you have the internet.
I mean, especially when we already had the RA rating precisely for that reason. So why do you, even censor the RA rating? What was the point of that category in the first place?
Such is the nature.
How does that affect your writing? Do you feel in any way you also tend to try to write consciously in a way that try to avoid talking a certain way or mentioning some issues? So I'm just wondering whether psychically it affects you.
I don't think it affects so much. I guess there are certain issues that I don't feel knowledgeable to touch too much upon. Mainly because I don't think I've done enough research on these matters. And maybe in the future, but currently I don't feel that the censorship issue is that conscious in my mind.
How do you see people talk a lot about Singapore's population changes and things like that over the last few years. How do you see the sort of literary landscape of Singapore changing? Do you see new writers coming in? Do you see gaps that you still think need to be filled, or and do you see identities changing as writers perhaps are more mobile, travel, and writers coming into Singapore perhaps influence what Singaporeans are writing? What kinds of changes do you see?
That's a very good question. I think we often say that the 90s or 2000s were a bit of a lost decade for fiction writing, Singapore fiction writing in particular.
The poetry scene just basically bloomed.
Yeah, but fiction was quite
It's quite
quiet.
You can count on one hand
Yeah,
how many fiction writers there were.
Yeah. But I think there's a gradual change, especially now. I think Serif, Map Paper Press, I think they're doing a great job in getting new voices out. I think it's encouraging for young writers to be heard and read. And I think it's a great thing. QRIS, of course, has always been there, almost a lone voice. And then I think a lot of writers are realizing it's a more of a global landscape. They don't have to contribute just locally or regionally even. They can contribute internationally to foreign magazines or e-zines and such. For myself, after writing The Beating, I submitted stuff to some Canadian e-zines and some overseas because I enjoy writing fantasy and horror. So I wrote a few pieces, then submitted them, and they've been published. Of course, they're not, like pro-rate or anything, but it's always enjoyable to see your story out elsewhere and such.
Why fiction? Never think of poetry?
Not really, I think. I don't know. It's just
not theatre as well.
theater. I guess again, fiction has the advantage of you being the creator and you being responsible for. After doing film and TV productions, there's so many collaborators, so many balls to be juggled in order to come up with a credible version of what you wrote, you created.
You just want to be the one cook,
Yeah,
right?
you just want to be the one.
Get out of the kitchen with everyone else.
Yeah. You just want to be the lone creative, especially seeing after how the scripts were massacred during the process of getting them done here. It was not very encouraging to me. And, that's why I rarely do scripts now.
What's your take on short fiction versus long fiction as a dominant form? Do you think it's a matter of necessity, or is this something we need to grow into? What's your take? Is it a valid form in itself?
Well, definitely short fiction is a valid form, and I guess definitely for myself, short stories are easier to handle. I'm currently working on a novel, but I'm finding a struggle to pull things together now. And in fact, it might come together as a bunch of short segments or short novellas rather than one complete novel. I think the short fiction form definitely is very much legit, but I think to most readers want to read a novel these days. And I don't know with the rise of ebooks and such, whether that will change. I know I buy a lot of Kindle singles with a very short non-fiction and fiction pieces.
Do you find that satisfying, more satisfying than reading a novel?
Sometimes yes, because I think a good, well-written essay is really satisfying. I mean, especially this where you can read from everywhere, New Yorker, New York Times Magazine, Guardian, and all. Often there's the impact, and I think sometimes some novels are just too bloated for their own good.
It should be short stories.
Yeah, and the idea has been explored, and there's nothing really new. So I enjoy the short form quite a bit.
And yet, The Beating is one book where length seems to be beside the point. The longest story is almost 1/4 of the book. The shortest is just 1 page. And between that, you get stories of very, very lengths. I mean, I did one during his launch, that if you're going to read a story, just make sure you know how long that story is before you started, because some of them you can't stop until it's ended, and some of them you expected to spend a night with the story, but you know it's over in 10 seconds. I'm just curious. How do you decide on the length of a story?
I guess it was tough. Sometimes you just had a situation where you thought demanded a bigger story. Senang and the Beating. I thought the character was interesting enough to contain a story. In fact, the original proposal for this book was a novelization of the Beating, but I found that it really didn't sustain itself for a novel. It just the point had been made. The character's journey was complete within that length, and that was enough for it. So for the other stories, I guess some were experimentation, some you wrote just for the fun of it. Okay, what would happen if a neighboring block did a Mary Celeste and everyone disappeared in the middle of the night? Or for me, I never tried historical fiction, so I wrote a person called Senang, which was it also became quite long, and it was sometimes a challenge, and because I guess it was an actual event, which I thought was quite monumental, it just stretched and stretched. I don't know whether it could have been compacted, but that's, I guess, how it comes about.
Do you want to give a bit of a synopsis of Senang, or at least a bit of
Okay,
teaser
Senang.
of sorts?
It was quite curious. I was actually at a Borders warehouse sale at an expo, and there are 10,000 books out there. You flip around, and then I just opened this book about 100 greatest massacres in history, and there was something about Senang, which I never heard about. Apparently, this British, I don't know, was it a prison guard or a civil servant, had started a community to superintendent, yeah, to kind of like a place where prisoners could go to do like carpentry, gardening, and such in order to reform.
It was an experiment.
Yeah, it was an
A
experiment,
experiment.
and as a lot of social experiments, it failed terribly. The prisoners revolted, and the superintendent was killed in the revolt. So I thought that was a great. It was a great idea for a story, so I took it away and then wrote it. And but you find also kind of a lot of mythology about the island itself when I was doing research for it, about how there used to be a village there, and they had spurned a man by refusing to give him water, and he had cursed the island. So of course it tied in quite nicely to the overall story in the end. So I used that as the kind of the top layer of the sandwich that became Senang.
The bottom layer of the sandwich is independence
Yeah.
of Singapore.
Yeah. I guess because when the event occurred, it was just right at the cusp of Singapore becoming independent. So I thought it would have to end with that. And I don't want to say too much about why or such. Maybe I don't even know whether I can explain it. I thought it was the right way to end it.
So was that the first time you were experimenting with fictionalizing a historical account?
Yeah. It was.
Do you think you're going to do more of that?
I think I would want to try a bit more, but I think I must find the right kind of push or event.
It definitely is one story that's quite different from the rest, precisely for the reason it's a totally different genre, historical fiction. I wonder whether anyone else have already started reading or finished The Beating and other stories? Other than Su Lian, who has done her homework. Over the weekend she will come prepared to tekan. Dave, anyone? No? Okay. So you probably have to do a bit of explaining
Okay.
relating to the stories. How about there's some stories that are not. I'm now coming properly to The Beating and other stories. There are some stories in there that are of the magical realism genre. Basically, he the setting is Singapore. The setting is in the heartlands, but Dave does things that make you relook the whole place. Like for example, have you imagine the possibility of a whole HDB block where the residents disappeared overnight. You know, I mean that as a premise to begin with, and then subsequently that is really besides the point. The point is how do people cope with emptiness? People in their life, or it becomes a metaphor for people in your life who fall out, who never paid attention to, right? And the ending is quite poignant in that story. Suddenly the author steps into the story and becomes part of this whole adventure. Magical realism, you didn't really mention any writers that give, other than Kafka, that give you that dimension.
Of course, in the past few years, I've been reading widely, and I read a bit of Borges
Okay.
for his, and I guess I'm inspired to think outside the conventional. Why be so limited by? Of course, inevitably, I read Murakami as well. Very surrealistic ideas. So I decided to try venturing into those ideas. I guess the vanishing, and also the tiger of 142B, where a tiger roams a housing block. So those were.
And you don't really know whether the tiger is real or not.
Those are ideas to play around with, to stretch. I guess the possibility of also fiction set in a housing estate kind of narrative. I mean setting.
But all of them, they always have that narrative, and another narrative is about the inner disintegration of the main character. Something is disappearing or dying away. That always there's a parallel development you can read for both levels. I'm just curious in this all these stories where something strange happens. Why do you feel that Singapore is such a good? Do you feel that Singapore is such a good setting? I mean, it's a rhetorical question for this kind of writing.
I think Singapore is actually a great setting. I think, like I said, with such an intensity of people, I think the situation presents itself, and to stretch the possibilities. I mean, why is everything? Of course, after writing so many stories, I was thinking, okay, what can I do that's interesting to me or fun? As I said, I read a lot of fantasy horror writers like Stephen King and all that, so it's always fun to think about the possibilities of certain things happening, and what would ultimately is, I guess, I hope it shows a different side of Singapore and its psyche and its people in the stories.
But it also, I mean, Singapore people, I mean, the lives of Singapore people tend to say that it's boring, it's quite standard, it's quite predictable. And yet, you show that even predictable aspects can be quite interesting, quite unpredictable sometimes. I mean, if you just introduce a different angle, and then there's a different depth that shows out. And I thought that is curious. I mean, you did mention the horror aspect. There's one thing Singaporeans never get bored of: horror stories, ghost stories. You know, and you have that in quite a number of your stories. The horror, not in the ghost story way, but a sense of the uncanny, of something scary inside you that you are afraid to know, to confront, but nonetheless you live with this. Right now, like for example, there's one story which I particularly like, called Shoot, which is really about a girl coming to terms with her teenage pregnancy, right? And that horrific core of her life. That wasn't a question. That was really. I'm just curious about this horror thing. What is it about horror that interests you? Is it for Malaysia?
I guess you have a different sense of the macabre and the supernatural, and
there's a pole aspect in that writing also. I mean, the way when you talk about the macabre.
But also, I guess certain story just come about. I mean, just to clarify, Shu isn't really a horror story. Actually, it's more. It just comes about sometimes when I read certain stories or certain essays, and I think, okay, what if this had been transplanted into a Singapore setting?